Hi there, my name is Isaac Oster and I will be doing an introduction to 3D Studio Max for 3dtotal.com. This is a really useful piece of software that's extremely common in the video game industry. This is what it looks like when it opens up. By default there's a perspective view, a side view, a top view, and a front view. If you wish to maximize these, you can click around. You see the yellow outline. So to fill the screen with one of these windows, you can hit Alt-W, and that will take us here. In order to move around the scene, there are a few camera controls. If you hold the Alt key and the middle mouse button, this will rotate the camera. If you scroll the middle mouse button, this is going to zoom in and out, and just the middle mouse button being pressed down will pan the camera around. So initially what I'm going to do is talk about a few of these icons on the toolbar here. The first one is going to be selection options. So in order to have the selection options mean something, we should have some items here to select. I'm just going to make some boxes. So initially there is select object, which just allows you to click on an object and select it. The next icon here is a list. So this is going to list all of the objects in the scene. You can select a few. Most software that I've come across uses Shift to do multiple selections, but Max is unusual in that it uses Control. So if I want to select multiple objects, I need to hold Control down to do that. This right here is going to be a drag select. So with it selected, I can just drag around and select what I need to select. If I hold this down, there's some other options here. There's the circular select, the hard angle lasso, the soft lasso, and spray paint, which is a little bit unusual, but you can sort of just drag and anything under the cursor will be selected. This will control whether or not an item is selected if it's just partially contained in your selection. So with it on, I need to completely surround an object with the selection window in order for it to be selected. So if I've got this little peach guy over here partially selected, it'll ignore it. So the next thing I want to talk about is, we're going to hop over to this area right here. It's called selection sets. And what this is, basically, if you want to have a specific collection, you can store that selection. So I go ahead and hit this, and you can see right there it's got the two boxes that I had selected in there, and I can come back and select it later and won't have to worry about grabbing all those individual objects again. The next button here I'd like to talk about is the select and move button. If I click it, what I get is this this little gizmo here. This is called the transform gizmo. In this case it's the move gizmo. I can toggle through the other ones real quick. There's the rotation gizmo and the scale gizmo. So for now we're just going to talk about move. There are no options for it. If you select just one of the arrows, the X arrow, my movement is constrained to just the X-axis. Same thing with Z. So I'm moving the mouse kind of all over the place, and it's only going up and down. And Y will constrain to the Y-axis. If I want to move between two axes, I can grab this middle area here, and it'll be free to move anywhere on Y and Z, but will ignore X. And same thing over here. And if I want to just sort of move it randomly, I can grab it in the middle, and it's going to kind of go anywhere. The next thing we have is rotation. I can toggle through these, by the way, with move is the W key, rotation is the E key, and scale is the R key. So rotation works pretty much the same way as move. If I want to constrain the rotation to a specific axis, I can grab that axis. Otherwise, I can grab the middle and rotate it any way I want. And scale, same thing. Except scale has a couple of options. There are these. If I hold this down, I get these other options here. These two are fairly similar, but this one is kind of like an inverted scale, where if you scale up on one axis, it's going to shrink it on another axis. So it's almost like a squashing or stretching movement. The next thing I want to talk about is this drop-down right here, which controls the transform gizmo space options. So by default, with world selected, what this means is the transform gizmo is going to conform to a world space. So X is going to run along the X-axis and Y is going to run along the X-axis, or the Y-axis, and Z will go up and down on the Z-axis. If I rotate this and I stay in world space, these axes don't update. But if I switch to local space, now I am able to move this along its local axes. For local space, I'm just going to convert this into an editable poly and go to vertex mode. So each vertice has its own local rotations as well, and in this case these are parents. So right now we're taking on the transform of the parent, so you can see the axis lines up perfectly with the local space of the main object. Another useful one is screen. And what this is going to do is reorient the transform gizmo so that it's constantly pointing perpendicular to the screen. So I can move this guy around and it'll always be moving perpendicularly to where the camera is. This is really useful when you're nudging vertices and you want them to move in a very specific way. Alright, the next thing that I'd like to talk about is snap. What snap is going to allow you to do is control movement, rotation, or scale. You can either, with movement, by default, we're going to snap to the grid as I move it. If I right-click on this icon right here, I get the grid and snap settings options. So you can see by default, grid points is selected. I can turn on vertex, I can turn on midpoint, and what this is going to allow me to do is, as I move this around, snap to these various other spots. So this is the movement snap. There's also rotational snap. So this is going to restrict my rotation to, in this case, 5-degree increments. Again, I can right-click and the angle that I'm snapping to is set right here. I can make it 10, and now as I rotate, now I'm toggling through 10 degrees at a time. Percent is going to control scale. So I think by default it's set to 10%. That's kind of what it looks like down here. So that can be very useful as well. The next thing I want to talk about is the pivot control. When I select a single object, the pivot is going to be at the center here. As soon as I select a second object, that's where this comes into play. With the first option selected, each object is going to rotate around its own pivot, wherever that happens to be. In this case, it's the center of both of the objects. If I click and hold down, what this is going to do is put the pivot at the sort of the middle point between the two objects, so I can rotate them around a single point. The next option down is going to put the pivot at the origin. One thing to note is move, rotate, and scale will all have their own settings. Okay, next I'd like to talk about mirroring. So with this piece of geometry, I've selected the option in the pivot section here to move the pivot to the origin. And the reason for that is when I duplicate it, it's going to mirror it across the pivot. So I don't want the pivot to be sitting in the center of the geometry. So I'm going to click the mirror button, and this menu pops up. these buttons control which axis the geometry is going to be duplicated across. No clone means it's just going to move the original piece of geometry. Copy is going to make a new piece of geometry. What instance does, instance is a special kind of copy where any modeling that you do to one will be done to all of the others. So in this case there's only two, but if there were a lot of them, you only have to do it once, and your changes are made to all of them. And reference is a special kind of instance where whatever you do to the original shape will be done to the children shapes, but you can model the children shapes independently, and those changes will not be transferred back to the original piece of geometry. In the second row here, what this is going to do is take the negative direction of the y, so or of the second letter here. So in this case I'm mirroring it along the x-axis, and it's using the same value in y, but if I select the xy version, it's going to mirror it this way in the x-axis, but then use the negative value that you get from y. So same thing with y and z. So this is y, and this is the z axis. If I select YZ, it's going to use the negative version of that axis, and the same thing with Z. So now I'm duplicating, mirroring it vertically, and if I use ZX, it's going to, well, not look a whole lot different, but change the direction in X. And finally, the offset here specifies the distance of the mirrored object's pivot point from the original object's pivot point. There's another way that you can duplicate your geometry called cloning. You can get to the that feature by going Edit Clone. You can see here the hotkey is Control V, or selecting a piece of geometry and holding the Shift key down and dragging. When you do that, you will get the Clone Options menu to pop up, and here we can see Copy, Instance, and Reference. But in addition, there is this area where you can increase the number of copies. And when I do this and hit OK, it's going to make that number of copies, and each one will be spaced evenly out based on my original drag distance. Alright, next is the Align tool. Let me just move these somewhat out of the way and give them a little rotation. And change the scale. So the way this works is you select the objects you want to be modified, and then you select the Align button, and then you select the parent object. So with these deselected, let me just turn this stuff off here. If I turn X position on, what it does is it looks at the parent and it moves all of the children to the same X position as the parent. Same as Y in this case. Now Z is vertical and they're all at the same height, so turning Z on won't actually make much of a difference. With the orientation, that has to do with rotation. So if I turn X on, they all rotate to the same amount that the parent is rotated to. The y-axis won't do anything because they're not actually rotated separately from the parent on Y. And scale will do the same thing. If I turn X on, it will match the x-axis, y-axis, and the z-axis. So if I want them to be in a row again, I can turn the rotation on, and there they are. And if I want them to be sitting on top of each other, I can have their positions all the same as well. The last section, this area right here, current and target, what that's going to do is control what piece of the child is going to be aligned with what part of the parent. So by default it's set to pivot point and pivot point. Let me set them all equal to the same position. So if I select a minimum here, what it's going to do is actually move the minimum point on the child object to the pivot point of the parent object. And the way it figures out what the minimum point is based on world space. So the x-axis, if you look down here, goes this way. This is positive. Y goes this way, and z is up and down. So this way is positive in y, and this way is positive in x. So this way is negative in x, and this way is negative in y. So this corner is the negative corner. So it's taking the negative corner of the children and lining it up with the pivot point of the parent. And I can select center, and it'll move it to the center of the parent, or center of the children, and maximum, which will be this corner of the parent. Anyway, you get the idea. The next thing I want to talk about is layers. Layers are a way to organize different assets of your scene so that you can have things visible. You can control whether or not they're renderable. It's a very nice organizational tool. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to make a few primitives here. Okay. And this right here is the Manage Layers icon. So I'm going to turn it on. And what this does is it creates a new layer. This will delete a layer. This will add a selected object to a highlighted layer. If you've got an object and you click this button, an object selected, you click this, it will select the layer, and vice versa for this. If you select if a layer selected, and you click this, it'll select all the objects in the layer. This is a way to hide or unhide all layers, and this is a way to freeze or unfreeze all layers. So let me walk you through some of that stuff. By default, there is a layer 0, and anything that you create that isn't explicitly put into a layer goes into the first layer here. So just with that open, I'm going to show you what some of these do. So for each box here, they have their own hide, freeze, render, color, and radiosity icons here. And these are toggles that will control certain behaviors. So hiding is pretty obvious. If I turn this on, you'll see box 4 is now hidden. I can also hide everything by clicking on the layer. Okay. So freezing is a way to have an object in the scene and rendering, but you can't click it, you can't model it, you can't select it. And when it's frozen, well, I just froze the whole layer. When the object is frozen, it turns gray. So I can select this or click on this and it'll be selected. But if I click on this, nothing happens. So the reason that you might want to freeze something is to protect it from editing it accidentally, and it also sort of speeds up redraws in the system. So let's create a new layer, which we can do by clicking this icon, and I'll double click it to give it a name. I'll just call it new layer. And if I want to add some of these objects, let me come over here and do a right click. There's an additional menu here where you can control some of the stuff. So I'm just going to right click and unfreeze all. So if I have a couple of objects selected and I hit the plus sign, what this is going to do is add those objects to the new layer. You can also select an object from one layer, right click on it, select cut, and then go to new layer and hit paste, and it'll move automatically for you. Selecting objects in the layer dialog doesn't select them in the scene. By the way, I'm doing a control click to select these multiple objects. If I wish to select objects out of the layer dialog, I can select them and then hit this button right here, which is the Select Highlighted Objects and Layers button. As you can see, there they are. I can also do an entire layer, like that. If I have an object selected and I want to find out what layer it's in, I can hit this button right next to it. Just highlight selected objects layers. So in this case, this box is in new layer, so there's no change, but this box is in layer 0. So if I click it, you can see layer 0 is highlighted. If I wanted to hide or unhide all the layers, there's a button for that. It's right here. You can hide everything, show everything. And if I wanted to freeze and unfreeze all layers, I can do that as well. This column of icons will control the render flag basically for each object. So if I have everything turned on, everything will show up in the render. This, by the way, is the render button. We will get into this in more detail later on. Here we can see all 4 objects. But if I turn a few of these off and we render it again, even though they're in the scene, they're not showing up in the render. If I wanted to change the color, you can select an object and click this icon right here and pick whatever color you like. Or select the little color swatch next to the in line with the name of the object and change it that way. The layers have their own colors, but changing that won't actually influence the objects and the layers. Radiosity is a characteristic of rendering that yields really nice results most of the time, but it can be time intensive. So if you have radiosity in your scene but you don't need every object to be calculated in that, you can turn that off by clicking these flags here. Alright, so I've loaded up a personal project here to show you some of the display options, which are going to be located up here. First, some hotkeys. So this is a polygon model. If I hit F3, it will switch to wireframe mode. If I hit F3 again, go back to the shaded mode, and if I hit F4, it will show the wireframe and shaded mode together. So I'm going to hit F4 to turn that off. And what you may notice is there is some dynamic shadowing happening here. As I rotate around the camera, it gets a little bit noisy, and then once I let go, it resolves that stuff. So that's a part of the realistic option here. If I click this, just a regular left mouse button click, I have realistic, shaded, consistent colors, edged faces, and then some other options. So if I select shaded, it's going to get rid of that dynamic shadowing, that ambient occlusion. Consistent colors will put the hard shadowing back in, but not the soft ambient occlusion. Again, let me show what that looks like. So here's the ambient occlusion. You can see how noisy that is. Edged faces is just the F4 key, which I already showed you. And some of the options for with realistic turned on for how the shadows are calculated are down here. So if I turn off ambient occlusion, what you'll notice is that grainy shadow goes away. And if I turn shadows off, I'm actually going to lose the hard shadow that was there as well. So let me turn that back on. You can see what's happening there. There's some post effects that are included. If you click on the realistic section here, under stylized, if I select any of these, they will give the effect that the screen has been rendered using either graphite or ink or a colored pencil or whatever. So let me show you what a couple of those look like. So here's graphite, ink, pastel. Some of them take a little longer to set up, and this one actually looks like it's on paper. Tech, kind of a cell shaded effect. And to get back to the normal view, you just need to click on one of these. So I'll click on consistent colors, and here we are. Next thing I want to show you is how to sort of quickly navigate around the scene. There's some camera controls right here. If I click right in the middle of the box here where it says front, it'll move to the exact front view. But we still have perspective here. There's an orthographic front where there is no perspective. Let me turn wireframe on and zoom in a little bit. Whoops. So the hotkey for this, by the way, is F. There's a side view, top view. But using this icon, this tool right here, I'm moving to those views, but still maintaining the perspective camera. So I can click around, look at the back, look at the bottom, the top, etc. And when I'm in a little bit of at an angle like this, I have a wheel, and I can click and scroll that wheel around. And when I'm back in one of the front views, I can click this and rotate the camera 90 degrees. Okay, I just want to briefly talk about what the last little section here is. We talked about the layer manager. The Graphite Modeling Tools is a tool set that is for it's Max's retopology workflow. There will be a section on that. The Curve Editor is an animation tool. Schematic View is a way to see the grouping of different objects. The Material Editor is going to be a section unto itself, and it's where all of the materials get created. Render Setup, these are all the settings for rendering, and this is the button to, as you saw earlier, to create a render. This section here is a pretty big chunk of Max. A lot of good stuff happens here, but we're going to save that for coming lessons. My name is Isaac Oster. Thank you very much for spending time with me to go through this tutorial. I hope you found it to be useful, and I look forward to seeing you again.